All right, gentlemen, welcome to the Be the Man podcast. So excited today to have Charlie Engle with us. He and I met a few months back, and I've been looking forward to this. We were on a bus. We were sitting next to each other on a bus on a dark night, out doing some training, and caught a little bit of a story. And I asked you a question. I don't even know if you remember this. I asked you a question, and you said something that was so intriguing to me about suffering. I'm sure we'll circle back to this. Something about you had learned how to suffer, and I was like, whew. Like, we've got to talk. So before we get into it, why don't you tell us a little bit of your story, give us some background, and let's dive in, brother.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I remember that conversation too. And as you'll hear more of my story, suffering, both self-imposed and universal out of nowhere, plays equal roles in my life, so just like everybody's life. So for me, I grew up in North Carolina. I'm here in Durham, North Carolina today. I'm actually home, which I travel a lot, but grew up around this area, moved away to California, divorced parents, pretty crazy childhood, only child, super young parents, 18 years old. And, and with everything that goes along with that. And they divorced very early. So kind of grew up without, a dad in my life. And, my mom was a perpetual college student. She was in college the first, 10 years of my life. And so, and it was, look, I'm 60 years old. So it was the 60s and early 70s. And it was pretty interesting. And my mom was, she never met a cause that she wouldn't protest for or against, one or the other. So, I grew up carrying signs and walking down streets, and it was but that part of it was great, and I would like to say my mom, she passed a few years ago, but the greatest lesson I guess she ever taught me was just this idea of, she taught me how to think. She didn't teach me what to think. And, I don't get involved in parenting other people's kids, but I try to use it with my own and be very, very thoughtful about, teaching them critical thinking, but not trying to force my right and wrong and my opinions on them. Because if the lesson isn't inherently showing the path on its own, then our words as parents aren't going to magically make our kids feel a certain way. And if they're going to have a belief, I want them to feel the belief, not to believe it just because I believe it.
Yes. So it's theirs and not yours.
Yeah. And we all know if our kids, if they don't get the idea themselves, even if we've ushered them to a particular place. And look, there's certain things that are obvious and self-evident. If there's a certain lifestyle choice that you've made that you do every day in your life, of course your kids are going to be more likely to do that lifestyle choice. Right. So if you're a fitness guy, if you're an artist, if you're a musician, if you're an alcoholic, if you're a, gun-toting, whatever, and I'm not being judgmental when I say that, but I just mean whatever, it's attraction rather than promotion. Generally speaking, our kids and other people in our lives are going to be attracted to the parts of what we do that we like. But if we're constantly spouting off with our words about our beliefs, which I'm going way down a rabbit hole already, but like politics, for example, in this country, it's a lot of why we've ended up where we've ended up, in my opinion, is because it's the world is filled with words. Yep. And yet not many people actually live the words that they espouse. And wow. And so it doesn't matter what the topic is and whether it's liberal or conservative or whatever. It's just the way the world is. So for me, I grew up in a very a household where when my mom said she was going to do something, she did it. And and a lot of it was pretty wild as a kid. So I moved in with my dad when I was a teenager because I wanted to play sports, and my mom was not. She was a theater person, and I was a 13-year-old kid, and I knew I wanted to play sports. So I moved in with him, and I played every sport and sucked at all of them except for running. Because I was 6 feet tall. I was this tall, as tall as I am now, but I weighed about 115 pounds. And,
Oh,
football, it took a little while for me to figure out that I was a really good runner, though. And I won the state of California in the mile and half mile and a few things. And so, hey, Greg, let me just ask, are we a little glitchy on the Wi-Fi? Are we good?
just it cut out just a little bit, but we're still good. Keep going.
Okay, making
But
sure.
wait, how old
So,
were you when you started winning and you were like,
yeah.
hey, wow, this is I'm good at this.
Well, and it begs the question, I'm going to get stuck on kids, right? And I ask this question to people all the time. When you're with your kids, do you push them towards what they're good at or what they're passionate about? Because what if those two things aren't the same, right?
Oh,
Are they an amazing like musician, but they're terrible at basketball, but all they want to do is play basketball, but they love it. Like, you can tell their heart is in it. So do you shut down the basketball and force them to play piano because they've got this gift? Or do you let them be who they're going to be? I don't actually have an answer for that, but it's
all
always
right,
one of
that's a
those,
tough question.
and we all know that there's, some of the greatest, piano players in history never saw a piano in their life. In other words, that gift lived within them, but they weren't born into a situation where they got the opportunity to
Yeah.
play it. And so I don't know. I love these mental games, especially my kids are grown now, so I already screwed them up. So there's no, which by the way, we all do that. And I don't care how smart you are. No matter what, we make mistakes with our kids. So for me, look, my mistake as a kid, I went to college at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill as a 17-year-old freshman, and I thought I was a badass. I was Mr. Everything in high school, big high school, 2,000 kids, and I was the first white student body president in my high school, which was predominantly black. And so it was a big deal in North Carolina. And I go to Carolina, and like there's 4,000 other freshmen with the exact same resume I had. Because it's a big school and it's hard to get into. And I got lost, and I started drinking. The drinking age was still 18 when I went to college. And it was also 1980, or as I like to refer to it, the cocaine decade. And so, for honestly, the details don't even matter. It's all in my book, Running Man. Simon and Schuster published a few years ago. So if anybody's interested in more details, knock yourself out or write to me and I'll send you a book. But I spent 10 years really struggling as an addict and an alcoholic. And I was always the top salesperson at every job I ever had, because addicts are amazing salespeople. And
So
you know,
even while you're deep into alcoholism and
oh yeah,
addiction, you're still selling, still maintaining some success in other areas.
hell yeah. Not just some. I mean, buying houses and cars. And I mean, people have a
Wow.
misperception of what addiction or alcoholism looks like. And look, inevitably, as it did with me, as you'll hear in a second, that runs its course. You can't do that forever. But when you're in your 20s, I mean, think about, I'm a lot older than you, but just where we are now, how much harder it is to recover from anything now than
Okay.
it was, man, when you're 24 years old.
You can
Like,
abuse yourself and get away
you
with it
can,
the next morning.
yeah, totally, have a little sweat, take a couple aspirin and get on,
I'm
to the
good.
next thing. And for me, it was just this long pattern of, balancing overachieving on one side with my addictions on the other side. And I did everything. I went to rehab. I went to meetings. I got married. I did everything I could, I thought, to quit. And finally, my first son was born when I was 29. And I thought he was going to solve my problems. because surely any decent dad, would quit
Yeah.
these behaviors. Like, that's how I felt. But that, again, that's not how addiction works. Addiction isn't for 99.9% of people, it's that you're not making an active choice to
Right.
screw up your life or to not screw up your life. There's a trigger, and wherever that trigger comes from, and we can talk about this later if you want. I mean, I'm a big, I focus a lot on trauma. I coach tons of people. I mentor people. I sponsor people. It just depends on the situation. And I always dig in very quickly to trauma. And people they get carried away with trying to understand what trauma is and where it came from. And the fact is, it can be anything. It can be anything. When I was growing up, just because we're talking about me right now, those first couple of years when I was still a baby, my father was abusive to my mother. And I thought, I don't remember it. I was a toddler. I was a baby, right? So I don't remember it, but I know it happened. And I always felt badly for my mother because I thought it happened to her. And it took a long time for me to understand that it happened to me too, even if it was directed at her.
Yep.
Him yelling or even being physical with her, or that stress while she was pregnant with me, and like all those things actually caused stress responses in me that they become deeply embedded in who you are and everything about you. And they're sitting there no matter how you ignore them or how good your life may be in all these other places. You always wonder, why don't I feel more joy? Why don't I feel more of this or more of that? And very often it's that anchor that's still sitting in there. So for me, it finally manifested, and feel free to jump in anytime if you want to ask a question, but I want to get through this as part of the story. But for me, it finally came around to a couple months into my son's life, and things were going well. I had in fact, like, quit, and then for no reason I found myself in the worst neighborhood in town, smoking crack and drinking for 6 days and just really destroying everything I had built. And that binge ended with me handcuffed and sitting on the ground with the police looking through my car. And like, it was a bad situation. And I had this epiphany, and it wasn't it's not like rocket science here, but I mean, the words came to me very simply. Nobody's coming to save you. My infant son, this tiny little baby, he couldn't save me.
Right.
And my boss and my wife and my job and my parents, and like, none of those people, they could all and would all support me and love me once I made the decision that I'd had enough of this and I wanted to make a change.
Yes.
And that day I made a change. I went to a meeting that night, and I went for a run the next day. And I made a commitment to do those two things every single day until my life got better. And it actually got better quickly, but I continued to do those two things. And I went to a meeting and I went for a run for 3 straight years without missing a day. And
Yes.
and my life got significantly better just by focusing on whatever else was going on. It was going to be what it was going to be. But if I treated those two things like my life depended on them, because I felt like it did.
Yep. Wow. And that's so profound, because it's a simple commitment, but shifting your focus that much totally transform your life.
Well, people, look, dude, let me just say this because what you just said is important. People get caught up in thinking that they need to make huge changes. What they need to make, well, I don't want to say I know what's best for everybody, but generally what I find with people I work with, if I can get them to make small incremental changes, but really commit to them.
Yes.
Every day. Like, if it's cold plunge, if it's a nutritional thing, if it's going to bed at a certain time, if it's, whatever it is, or whatever those couple things are, if they can just commit to that, and like no matter what, it's like a run streak. I don't know if you've ever, I don't think you're a big runner, but like you're an athlete, but it's like being on a streak of something. If you've committed to do it and you've said out loud or inside your own head, like, I'm going to do this every day for 30 days or 60 days or a year, whatever it is, then no matter what, it's not like, oh, it's raining outside, I can't do it today, or I'm going to go travel on an airplane to Portugal. Like, how am I going to do this? Well, you know how you're going to do it? You're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
You're going to say, no matter what, I don't care if it's in the airport, I'm going to run or walk 2 miles if that's my commitment. Like, I'm going to do it no matter what. Or it's the first thing I do when I get to a new city, no matter what. And it's that mentality that I think really creates a long-term shift in people.
100%. But, and I think in my observations, that's actually pretty rare. Even for pretty, pretty committed people, it's rare to have a no matter what mentality, or treat it like you said, like my life depends on it. And this is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. We haven't even gotten into some of the things you've done since, but there's something here. I think this is where it started. You flipped the switch and said, I'm going to do this every day. And you did it for 3 years. Like, what? And this is where I want to get into. And obviously you have grown and expanded and conditioned and trained yourself more. What do you think? What do you say to yourself on the days you don't feel like doing it? Or when the circumstances really look like they're tempting you to say it's impossible today. Like, I've done well, but it's impossible today. What do you do differently my observation is different than the vast majority of people?
Yeah, it's funny. I just thought of, like, somebody will probably steal this idea if I say it out loud, but I'll do it anyway. Like, then my next podcast should be called Wiggle Room. Because what we do as human beings, if we allow ourselves even the smallest bit of wiggle room, to just edge out of a commitment, like, oh, it's out of our control, it's raining, my flight got delayed, the kids are sick, I don't know, whatever it is, it's so easy to step away from a commitment. For me, I actually made it pretty easy in a way. It doesn't sound easy to a lot of people, but I made a commitment I would run, and that meant 3 miles for me. So my minimum run for those 3 years was 3 miles. And I ended up running like 35 marathons during that period of time. And the joke I make is, like, always, because obviously I had that whole addiction thing under control, and so I was still, I ran like an addict in a way, but I think this is important. It's important to me. I ran that hard every day because, in a way, I wanted to get rid of that part of my personality. I thought if I ran hard enough, I could cut the addict out of me. Like, I could kill that guy because he was trying to kill me. And what I learned in those 3 years is that the addict is all the best parts of me. My obsessive nature and addictive nature it's everything that makes me good at stuff, and as long as I don't put drugs and alcohol in my system and I point my energy towards the things I'm passionate about, it's a superpower. I mean, this isn't a brag in any way, but I think nobody who spends a little time around me or knows my story doubts that if I say I'm going to do something, especially physically, it doesn't always mean I'm going to be successful. I'm not even saying that, but I mean, I'm going to get to that start line, and I'm going to take my best shot at doing this thing, whatever it is. And the impossibility of it is for other people to own. I think there's another big part of this, and we have a mutual friend, Jeremy, who he and I talk about this a lot. And it's about anchors. And I'll keep this brief, but it's about, the easiest thing to be in the universe is a critic. Yep. It's easy to just shit on other people's ideas and their passions. And I look at it as a recovering addict in my life. There were people trying to like there was a rope attached to me. They were trying to pull me back by saying, "Hey man, you weren't that bad. You just need to slow down," and even some family members who loved me, I realized that their fear was about what was going to happen to them. Their fear wasn't about, their fear was about me leaving them, my success. All of a sudden, I become a guy who doesn't need them and their nonsense and a drinking buddy or all this. I didn't need any of that anymore. And so what does that mean for them? And what does it mean for them in my life? So their way of trying to, they're not trying to do something mean to me. They're doing what
Right.
humans do.
It's a threat. Yeah. They're feeling threatened. Yeah.
Totally. They're worried about what about me if all this happens. And so, I just kept running during those 3 years, and there were days, of course, where I didn't want to do it. It was raining, it was snowing, I was traveling, I had sick kids, I had, you name it, it happened. But by never, I mean, literally, by never allowing the thought of, should I do this today? The only thought I ever had was, how am I going to do this today? And that's just a big difference in mentality. If you torture yourself with wiggle room, if that's a torture mechanism, it's a self-torture mechanism. And
Self-sabotage.
yeah, and you're doomed if that's the way you're going to approach it. And I just didn't approach it that way. And I look, man, at the end of those years, I also, I became curious about how far I could go, and I started doing runs all around the world. I entered 50 milers, then I entered 100 milers, then I entered races that across the Gobi Desert, across the Atacama Desert in Chile. I ran all the way across the jungles of Borneo and Fiji and Vietnam. And I did literally the hardest races in the world. And I think this goes back to our conversation on the bus, because I understood and valued self-imposed suffering. Yep. And I almost wish I had a better word than suffering, but suffering is kind of a fun word. Because here's the thing, man, anybody you ask, anyone listening to this, and by the way, everybody on here, when I talk about addiction, no matter who's listening to this right now, you either have struggled yourself, you have a family member who's struggled, you have a coworker, a close friend, somebody in your life, and maybe you've probably even lost someone to addiction, either through overdose or their body shutting down or suicide. I mean, it's all related. So so everybody knows what I'm talking about, even if it's not, you yourself. And I think it's important to note. And, what I recognize in the value of self-imposed suffering and I juxtapose that with the things that the universe just throws at us, right? I mean, there's a lot of gray area in between. If you do a certain lifestyle behavior, I'll pick an easy one. If you smoke for many, many years and you get lung cancer and you're surprised you got lung cancer, you're really not paying attention. Yep. Like, that's not actually an out of the blue disease. That's a disease that you probably dreaded and thought it was possible. A car accident or the death of a loved one. I mean, there's a lot of things that come out of nowhere in our lives. So why not give yourself self-imposed suffering, and in particular of the physical nature? And let's even switch gears for just a second. Well,
because it's miserable. That's why not.
Yeah. Well, but what's not miserable is, do you want to ship your kids like off to like Timbuktu some days? Do you want to close down your business and say, screw this, I don't know why I ever thought this was a good idea some days? Yeah, of course. We all feel that way sometimes. But if you've never felt it before, you might make a poor decision. And so what I love to always say to my own kids even is, don't make a big decision at a low moment, because those moments aren't real. Like, if you just get a good night's sleep or two, I'm not saying the problem's going to go away, but your ability to process it, and like, don't leave the marriage, Don't quit the job. Don't relapse if you've been sober for a while. Like, don't do those things at just some low moment. Let that moment pass by. But here's my pitch for like running a marathon or 100 miles or biking across Europe or what anything that it might be that you think might be your thing, climbing a mountain. There's gonna come a time if you pick something hard. Like, I've never run a 100 miler in my life that I didn't want to quit multiple times ever. It's a long way. I don't care if it's downhill and 60 degrees and it's next to an ocean and there's naked women along the way or it doesn't matter. You are going to want to quit. Yep. And the only moments that I ever remember in those races are the moments that I wanted to quit, that I was certain that I couldn't go on. So I actually want to get to that point. I don't remember all the easy stuff. You don't remember the easy days in your business. Nope. You remember the hard days because they're the ones that have taught you the lessons that will help you keep going in the future. So
and yet those are the things we like obsessively seek out, like to avoid discomfort, to avoid the failure moments. Like we spend our whole lives trying to box that stuff out. No. And you're saying, worse, lean into it. Choose.
Yeah, and worse, Greg, we try to eliminate those things for our kids. Yeah. You know, I had a woman a couple months ago. She's like, she raises her hand. She's like, you know, I just want my kids to have it easier than I had when I was growing up. And I just said, why? Like, what do you have against your kids? Right? Because I mean, you know, like, I mean, how is that going to help them, you know, learn anything, get anywhere? And I'm not saying like, you know, yeah, pull your 5-year-old out of the street if there's traffic coming, but like, you know, generally speaking, don't be a snowplow parent. And back to the beginning of our conversation. I mean, I'm not saying my mom, she was far from perfect, in fact, but she was a critical thinker. I would ask my mom the obvious questions. Like, I'll never forget, funny story, 72, it's presidential election. And look, full disclosure, my mom is a super liberal, like she's a theater person. She's a hippie, like there's just no choice. So I said to her, Mom, we have the presidential election at school. So as school kids, we voted in school, you know, just pretend election, whatever. And I said, who should I vote for? And this is Nixon and McGovern. And she said, well, Charlie, you know, some people think this and some people think this, and you're just going to have to make up your own mind. Despite the fact that, awesome. I mean, my mom, there's not a bone in her body that it would have ever voted for Nixon. Like that's not who she, you know, now, you know, McGovern, I think only won one state. So it was a historic beatdown in presidential elections. And I think I was the only kid in my school that actually voted that way too. So I probably got my ass kicked too. But I'll never forget the teacher who, she asked me, which is totally inappropriate. You couldn't do it now. She asked me who I voted for. And I said, McGovern. She had a I voted sticker and she like slapped it onto my chest like hard.
And what's wrong with you?
Anyway, you know, all that is to say, do hard things, man. And you know, the universe is going to serve up hardship for you. And you know, to try to avoid it is actually not just pointless, but it's actually harmful.
Yes. Okay. So there's lots of mindsets in there. There's lots of layers because I think people have heard this message and they get it conceptually. You consistently do it and you do it on a level that's beyond most of us. Like the vast majority of it, even after putting in a huge effort, we would quit. We would quit. So the one first step is like seek out chances to struggle, to challenge, to push your limits.
Yeah.
And when you hit those limits, I'm curious. I want to know, what are you saying to yourself when you're in 100 milers? Like when you did the Death Valley, 5 times, didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
And you've done these unbelievable adventures. When you are just empty, when you're hurting, what's going on? Why do you keep going when I would stop?
It's easy. I mean, and I'm not kidding. It's easy. And it's because experience has taught me, I'll answer it two ways. Experience has taught me two things. If it's 100, let's say it's Death Valley, it's Badwater, it's 135 miles. It's in second week in July and it's through Death Valley. I mean, it's the worst race on the planet. And, so multiple times I've gotten to mile 61 or 75 or whatever. If I allow my brain, and I've fallen apart, and if I allow my brain to say at mile 75, I've got 60 more miles to go, and I feel like this right now, it's impossible. It's just impossible. There's no way in my current condition that I can keep, but I don't think that way. What I know is when I feel this way as a runner, I need to eat 1,000 calories. I need to drink. I need to put some ice on my neck. I need to walk for a little while. I need to try to get my pain threshold from a 10 to an 8. And I need to get to the next checkpoint where my support team is. And so all I'm worried about is going 2 more miles until I see my car again. And beyond that, I literally, and maybe it's just I compartmentalize well. I recognize that if I don't get to my car in 2 more miles, then I can't get beyond my car. So instead of allowing myself to get stuck in this pain cycle and screwing myself mentally, then, and you can translate. That's why I say, do hard things that actually don't have great consequences. Right. I could quit Badwater and it's not life or death for me, right? I mean, I'm going to be upset about it or whatever for a day if I were to, and I did quit one time, I had to, and medically got pulled from the race. It just wasn't my day. And so I do know what that feels like too. But think about how that translates to your business or to your, when you're having the worst day with one of your kids who has gotten in some serious trouble at school, or there's some real stuff going on. Do you get a chance to just throw up your hands and say, oh, well, I'm not doing this anymore?
Right, you
no.
Get out of it.
No. And so giving yourself those opportunities to learn what that feels like in a situation that isn't critical, right, particularly. But when I get through that moment and I make it to the finish line of that race, I take those lessons with me and they translate so easily to my marriage, to my business, to my relationship with my kids. Like it teaches me to handle the hard situations that are going to come up in life. And again, physically, people just don't realize what they're capable of. And so here's the other thing that I will say though, because like right now, people are listening to this and they're thinking, okay, Charlie, I got it. I'm going to go plan this massive adventure. Then they get caught up in the paralysis of analysis and they're trying to figure this out and whatever. And they think maybe they're thinking too big. I'm going to go climb Mount Everest. Well, for God's sakes, wherever you are, figure out an adventure that's digestible, can be done maybe in a weekend. Don't enter somebody else's event if you want to, but don't forget, like I love this lowest to highest thing. And I do this all around the world. I like going from low points to high points. So, you could, if whatever country or state you live in, you could plan some little adventure to go from the lowest point to the highest, or you could plan to ride your bike across your county. Like I love this kind of thing. Like, let's say that's like 50 miles from end to end. Well, you get a map, you make a plan. It's like doing a business plan. It's a great learning tool. You figure out, okay, there's 5 7-Elevens on the way. There's a restaurant I'm going to stop and have lunch in. I've got a support team that's going to drive my car so that in case I need anything and whatever. And you just make a plan and you do it. And people just get way too caught up in trying to overplan and train for 6 months. Man, you're not trying to win the Boston Marathon, for God's sakes. If you're a reasonably fit person, just go do it.
That is awesome. Man,
so you're thinking about Portugal already. You're like, where am I going?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I got a whole continent here with
Yeah.
amazing mountains.
Yeah.
Mont Blanc is not that far.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
I mean, that's for real.
oh, that's awesome. But I just I love the concepts you're saying here, because what you're doing is you're establishing low risk simulations, so to speak. Like,
Yeah.
it's very low risk. It's a simulation for real life. And you can learn so much in the process and about yourself, so that when real life does show up, you're like, hey, wait, I've done something like this. I've tested my capacity.
Yeah.
I've gotten to this place where I can think differently.
Yeah. Well, and look, I would be remiss, I've over talked a little bit on a few things, but you know about this already. So I'll just tell you for your listeners, and that is, I became years back the first person. By the way, my life got better enough where I was the senior producer for a TV show called Extreme Makeover Home Edition for years. And so everybody saw that show on ABC, and it was the number one show on TV for years. And at the same time, I became the number one ultra distance runner in the world for a while. So I went from this addict type person to, doing some pretty cool stuff. And I got this idea to run across the Sahara Desert. And I ended up, through a series of crazy circumstances, partnering with Matt Damon. And Matt produced and narrated this film, Running the Sahara. And I became the first person in history actually to run all the way across Africa, about 5,000 miles. So, yeah, so I ran from Senegal all the way across Africa to Egypt and the Red Sea. I ran through Giza. I'm the only Westerner to ever run all the way through, Libya. So Mali, Niger, Mauritania, all, 6 Islamic countries. And it was the most amazing experience. And when it was over, I basically ran 2 marathons per day for 111 consecutive days without taking a day off. So who knew Africa was that big? It was like,
Huge.
I should have checked the maps a little closer, but you can still get the film Running the Sahara. It was on Netflix in places a long time, but it's just on Apple, on iTunes these days. So
Perfect.
But that also led to the creation of what is today the world's largest clean water nonprofit called water.org. And when I ran, I made a decision that I was going to start a clean water nonprofit. I raised about $6 million during the run and after. And we realized it was way bigger than we were going to be able to handle. We partnered with someone else. Today it's called water.org. And we've we've raised about 1.5 billion. We've deployed about 4 billion. And, and here's the thing, Greg, I had no intention of doing that. People also get way too caught up in outcomes. You cannot ever predict the outcome of something like this. All you can do is focus on what's right in front of you. Do the thing. I just wanted to see if I was capable of running across the Sahara Desert. I wasn't trying to do anything more than that. But out of that crazy idea came another thing that now affects the lives of millions of people in a positive way. And they don't know who I am. They don't know anything about, I call it accidental philanthropy. If you go do hard things, and it is my other big lesson I try to work with my kids on, and they don't listen to me, same as most kids don't, but young people in particular get so attached to outcomes that right from the beginning, when they're analyzing, and you as a business guy, this too, if you get so attached to the outcome right at the very beginning, you probably will never take the first step, because maybe you've done all the analysis and you've come to the conclusion it's not worth it. That may be true, but your success, I don't even know, in fact, Greg, I barely even know what you do or whatever, but I know that you've done well for yourself, my guess, and this is not a genius statement, you've gotten where you are, but the path for getting there ended up being much different than you
Oh,
thought it would be.
totally different. Yeah.
And that's why, again, people who get caught up in trying to map everything out and they've got to have every detail in place. I mean, honestly, more power to those people if it works out, but I can't, I don't do well. Yeah, I don't do well with those folks because life is about adaptation. And I don't care if it's in the moment or long term. It's not uh, about avoiding the hardships we've already established. It's about who are you when the hardships come along.
Yes. I'm gonna write that down. And it's there's this word mettle, METTLE, and it's kind of like, what do you have inside of you? What kind of metal do you have? Like, who are you when the hardships come along?
Yeah, no, that's it. Well, and it's easy to be an optimist when everything's going your way, right? But who are you when the world throws those curveballs and you feel desperate and out of control? And I mean, I'm going to say this one thing, and this is case in point. My wife has cancer. We've been married 10 years. She's had cancer for 6 years. We're still in the middle of it right now. Like this is an everyday part of my life and her life. And we never expect she played professional beach volleyball and was a pro cyclist. And like, she lived in the Amazon by herself for years. Like, this is a badass human being, and we had everything all mapped out, all these things we were going to do together, and hopefully we still get to do them together. But that's not the way it works. And you either, you adapt to the situation and you figure out how to make the best of it. And I haven't done a good job of that sometimes. There's been plenty of days where I freely admit, like, it feels, impossible. But I just encourage people always to make your plan, and then when things go wrong, because they will, then you get the opportunity to show what you've learned and find, the next right path.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So many great insights, Charlie. How do you sustain this long term? You've been doing this for a long time. And like, how do you in fact, I want to take the whole picture, because I'm all about holistic optimization, whole life optimization. I'm confident that you're drawing on sources of power, not just physical, but mental and emotional and social and spiritual. How do you nourish your whole being, so to speak? How do you, like, because it's like you do endurance events, but you have an endurance life.
Yeah, it's a great question.
I know you've got some things, you've figured out some things along the way of like, in fact, you've become a master of sustainment.
I have, and I'm actually, thanks for saying that. And I normally, I don't know, I don't do a lot of self-congratulating, but I would agree with you in this case. I'm part of it is my desire, as my wife would point out, to never have a real job. So, because I suck at at normal. So I'm a speaker, I'm a writer, I'm a consultant, and I consult in longevity. I do a lot of coaching. And coaching means anything. It's life coaching, it's transcendence coaching, it's coaching not just in longevity and wellness, but in psychedelic therapies. I am a big believer. And look, man, I'm 30 years clean and sober. Less than a month from now, assuming I don't, relapse, I'll have 31 years. And my way of celebrating, by the way, is I will run on July 22nd and 23rd. I'll run for 31 straight hours. Not
I thought you were going to say miles. Of course.
Right. Yeah. Oh, right. People always assume. And I've done this for many years. So I run for the same number of hours to equal, and I'll do it with a bunch of other people at a treatment center up in Maryland. And it's my way of honoring not just my time, but the other people that I've lost, and those people who are still trying to figure it out, and and all of that. But I think when I use the word longevity, and I'm using it with anyone, and I think this does answer your question: how have I done it? The how I've done it is to always try to keep my mind open to the next thing that might help me. Not jumping on the next bandwagon either, though. And I don't want to poo-poo or get in arguments or have people write me emails about, keto or fasting or whatever. It's not my thing. I have lived a healthy lifestyle for a very long time, and I don't need a fad thing to come along and, and try to change that somehow. Like, it's not, and again, I'm not saying that, if you listen to Andrew Huberman or you listen to Peter Attia or some of these true experts in the field of longevity, and the longevity is not just physical, it's mental, it's spiritual. I'm partners with Deepak Chopra in a business around addiction and recovery. So I've had a chance to be around this beautiful man for, years, and listen to his, philosophy, which is very, I would say, Buddhist in nature. I'm great friends. Everybody should write this down. His name is Gabor Mate, Gabor, and his last name is Mate. And he has a book out now called The Myth of Normal. And he was, he's a Hungarian Jew in his, around 80 or so, who was rescued as a baby from the, concentration camps when he was a kid. And he believes that, and I believe it, in trauma-informed disease pathology, let's just put it that way. So yes, we can trace certain diseases to, maybe certain causes, whether they're genetic or environmental in some way. But the vast majority of what ends up being wrong with us is actually stress related.
Yep.
It's caused by traumas, like I was talking about earlier in this conversation. So those things that happened to, what I thought, to my mother, they happened to me. Yeah. Did they contribute to me being an alcoholic and an addict? I am of the belief that absolutely 100% yes is the answer to that. And a long time ago, I would have told you that I thought it was just genetics, because I'm a fourth generation, drunk, as I like to say. And like, so there are some of those factors, but when you get trauma in you and in your body, it lives there and stays there until you figure out a way to get it out.
So you used the word embedded before, and I really like that. I was just hanging on to that. And this is it. It gets embedded.
You got to get it out. And for me, I've used, and people have accused me my whole life of like, oh, well, you changed addictions. Now you're just a running addict. Well, some of that was my way of getting at those parts of me that I couldn't reach through traditional therapy or through meditation or some other mechanism. Like, I just felt like there was 25% of my crap it's like wedged way deep down in here. Right. And so how was I going to get to that? If running 1,000 miles or across a desert or whatever, if that wasn't going to get it, how am I going to get there? So I decided that I needed to open my mind to other therapies, that are, all of these things are going to be legal, like very, very soon. Anything from, ketamine is legal, but ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin, all of these things are and I am talking about therapeutic use with a professional. People want to argue with me sometimes about what all that means. And I'm like, look, man, just because an MD hands you a pill, you decide that makes it okay, like an antidepressant or some other thing. Yet, and you and I both work with, we have this veteran community that we're around who kill themselves at rates that are 10 times greater than the average American. yet we want to send them to talk therapy and like, oh, it's too dangerous to give them psilocybin. I'm like, it's too dangerous to give them psilocybin. I got to tell you, dude, putting a gun to your head and pulling the trigger, that's pretty dangerous too. And no one's ever died of a psilocybin overdose. So, you know, people just, they need to calm down on what they think, you know, that things like, I wish there was another word. Plant medicine is a little gentler, but you know,
So let's
the,
let's deep dive a little bit here. And so those are all, I'm not familiar with each of those, but basically it's psychedelics. And well, are you, I don't know how open you are willing to talk about it. Have you tried it? Like, are you
yeah,
around it? I'm so curious because I'm hearing
yeah,
so many positive things coming out from people who are addicts, people who have experienced severe trauma, soldiers,
yeah.
like, and I've read about it. I've talked to people personally, and the things I'm hearing are really positive.
Yeah, it's incredibly positive. And look, the key, and I just want to reiterate what I just said a moment ago so people don't get like carried away with the wrong idea. Therapeutic, meaning you have a professional therapist who is guiding you through this process. You do a lot of pre work, meaning defining what it is we're trying to get at. Like, what is the issue? What are we, maybe the issue, let's just take depression, you know, for example. Like, a lot of people suffer from depression, and usually it's not the only thing. Depression can go with addiction to substances, PTSD, obviously. So again, especially in the veteran community, we're seeing a lot of people who have these things. So, you know, there was a study out of Harvard recently, and it's the most comprehensive study of its kind of our time, that basically says 2 doses of psilocybin, which is mushrooms, you know, 2 doses of psilocybin at a prescribed amount. And that is somewhere, you know, if you listen to Andrew Huberman's podcast
This stuff
about
is awesome.
psilocybin,
Okay,
and like,
I get that one.
yeah, he just did that. This podcast was just a few weeks ago. So it's easy to find. It's 2 hours on psilocybin. It's the best explanation that is both scientific and dumbed down for people like me who can actually, so you can actually understand it. But those 2 doses, 7 to 10 days apart, essentially in the study subjects ended up getting 60% better results. So psilocybin along with a therapist rather than an SSRI like Paxil or Zoloft or one of the antidepressants, that along with a therapist, 60% better results. And it lasted for a year.
Wow.
The
So wait, hold on,
antidepressant,
hold on. Two
two,
doses, 7 days
yeah,
apart, 1 year
yeah.
positive benefit.
Exactly. And no, you know, anybody who's ever taken an SSRI knows it has sexual side effects. It has it has all kinds of negative side effects.
Okay, so your sex drive goes up or it goes weird or
No, I mean,
down?
terrible. No, it go, not only does it go down, you can't, you know, you can't get an erection. You can't, like, it's SSRIs. Yeah. I mean, it's a good thing it cures your depression because the side effects would depress you all on their
Would
own.
crush you.
Yeah. And look, and I am comfortable saying that I've had a couple of experiences myself with, you know, professionals at Johns Hopkins. And, you know, I am a person that believes strongly that intent matters with everything. Like,
Agreed.
there may be people out there who would like say, oh, well, you know, you say you're a sober person. Well, if you did this, then you're not sober. I'm like, that is, I mean, it's not true. It'd be like saying, if I went to the dentist and I had 2 root canals, but I took some hydrocodone for 3 days, yeah,
No.
like I'm no longer sober. It's just nonsense. And anyone who feels that way, you're welcome to like unfollow me, delete me from social media. You do whatever you want, because right now, Greg, let me just tell you, in the United States, less than 10% of people who go to rehab for a substance issue, less than 10% are actually still sober a year later. It's more like 7%. Name me any other industry in the world where a 7% success rate would actually be okay.
And even be
You know,
sustainable or stay in business. Yeah, those rates
yeah,
have bugged me for decades.
Yeah, what if your car got fixed 7% of the time when you took it to the mechanic, or you go to a restaurant and 7% of the time you get a good meal? Like but it's acceptable. And I don't want to get on my high horse here too much, but it's acceptable because it's all about money. Lobbyists are paying politicians and the prisons, the hospitals, big pharma, everybody. All you ever have to do is look at who benefits from the treatment of keeping people sick in addiction and recovery and depression and PTSD and all of these things. Who benefits? Well, it's pretty obvious who benefits. I don't need to go down the list. And so we have to look at alternate methods
Yes.
of getting people help that they need and stop being so dogmatic about certain things. And I'm a huge advocate in the addiction recovery space. I work with a place called Ashley Addiction Treatment Center in Maryland. That's where I will be doing my 31-hour run. And by the way, anybody listening to this, July 22 and 23, I'll send you a flyer. I don't know if you do show notes.
Yep.
But if there's some show notes, we'll put the flyer in there. Anyone's
Beautiful.
invited to come join me it's on a 2-mile loop. So a lot of people just come and spend a couple of hours hanging out and running around in a circle. It is a fundraiser, Greg. So I don't mind saying that last year I raised about $100,000 during the run, and
Nice.
that money goes for scholarships for people who can't afford treatment.
Perfect.
So I unashamedly ask for people to toss some money in the kitty if they want to. And, everybody knows somebody that needs help with addiction or some other mental health issue. And so it's an opportunity to do that. And look, I have, and I'm not, I know we need to go soon, but I wanted to tell you, I think you know about this, but I'm never shy about talking about my next big project, which is, going from the Dead Sea to the top of Mount Everest. And basically it's the lowest place on the planet to the highest point on the planet. And as I like to say, it's kind of the journey that we are all on from low places to high points, and trying to find our way to navigate through all of this. And it will be a big journey. I'm actually going to do this on all 7 continents, and I have yet to do Europe. I'll go kind of from the Caspian Sea up to the top of Mount Elbrus. It's one of the shorter ones, but it's a very complicated one because of where it's located. But be careful, you might get sucked into it with me when the time comes.
Man, every time I hear you talk about it, when I first heard about it, I'm like, I want to do that.
Yeah. Well, I just made a big arrangement actually with some folks in the head of YPO in Israel. We are putting together a big program for the beginning of Dead Sea to Everest. And because, it's a little hard to calculate exactly where I'll be at certain points along the way. And for the listeners, I'm literally I'm gonna kayak across the Dead Sea, do a free dive in the Dead Sea to the lowest place I can reach, continue across to Jordan, run all the way across the Arabian Desert to Oman, row about 1,000 miles across the Indian Ocean to India, mountain bike to the base of Mount Everest, which is a couple thousand more miles in Western Nepal, and then, climb to the top. And so there's so many problems that are inherently built into this, but people will be given the opportunity to come out and join, and, we'll try to do some good along the way. All this is on my website, by the way, which is just my name. It's charlieengel.com. Also, I spent a year and a half in federal prison, so all of that stuff is on my website. And crazy story that I never shy away from, but all the details are on there if you want to see what it looks like to have everything, to lose everything. So I'm very open about all of it.
Gosh, so many stories. We could keep talking for hours and hours and hours. This is so awesome, brother. I love I love what you're doing, and that you took your own transformation. It sounds like immediately just went outward with it.
Yeah.
And you're
I
sharing.
think look, it's what you're doing right now, my friend. And that is, and we don't know each other super well, but I know this about you already. If you as a human being are willing to be vulnerable in front of other people and share those parts of yourself, it encourages other people to do the same.
Exactly.
And in particular with men, it becomes a little more complicated in figuring out how to be vulnerable without sounding like you're complaining, or I don't know, you just have to sort it out for yourself. But, most of the time, when we open up and talk about, some struggle, I have found that 99% of the time, what I get back is other people's stories of struggle.
Yep. And that connect,
And
and the bond,
yeah,
and I think the power. One of the things I love to say is, where there's pain, there's power. And
yeah,
that applies in so many ways to what you've taught us today, brother.
yeah. Well, and if we belong, and I'm sorry, I don't remember. Are you part of GoBundance?
No, no, it
Do
just
you
was.
know GoBundance?
Yeah, I know about Go Bandits. Yep.
Okay, yeah. So that's another good example. Like it's a great organization. There's probably 1,000 members. It's all guys, but what I love about it is they go do things. So
Exactly.
it's not just a bunch of talk on Zoom calls and whatever. Like they have regional things and they get together and they go whitewater raft, they go climb a mountain, they go do whatever. And we all know, especially as men, and I'm not trying to exclude women here, but like they have the same experience. But as men, if we could meet in a coffee shop once a week for a year for an hour, and we would not get as much out of that as we would a 3-day get together on some mountain where we do something physically hard and we help each other and we bond through that experience. Like that's how you become friends with people,
Exactly.
is going to do things with them. Not sitting around talking about, business. It
Yep.
just doesn't, it's not how it works.
100%. Man, so much goodness, Charlie. I appreciate it so much. Um, if you were just one last thought here, if you were to just really kind of hone down
Hmm.
the most important message that you're sharing, and you've been sharing it for a long, long, long time.
Yeah. Simple.
Okay.
It is actually
You
simple.
already got it.
Pops to my head right away. And it just is this simple idea that, well, I even would say two things. I said it earlier in our chat. Nobody's coming to save you, first of all. Like that's not apocalyptic type message. It just simply is the realization that if you take that step forward, very much like right, the Paulo Coelho famous book, The Alchemist.
So good.
Like if you take that first step, the world will conspire to help you. Like, but the world doesn't get together and try to push you out the door. The world will, once you take that step out the door, the world will come together. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy or go exactly the way you want. But the real message is this: what happens to us isn't nearly as important as what we do about it. I mean, good things, bad things are going to happen to us every day. Like all this is going to happen. What matters is your response, not head in the hands and, oh my God, why does this always happen to me? I'm not saying that we all don't have those moments. We all have them. I don't care who you are. I had one a couple of days ago, where I'm like going, I can't do this anymore. I'm saying those words out loud to myself. I can't do this anymore. Whatever was going on, I don't even remember. Like that's how fleeting they are. But like you have to let those moments pass. I also, I know it's a longer answer than you wanted, but I also believe I've also learned this lesson. When I have that occasional like super off day, like I can just feel it, man. I've got a little depression going on. Maybe I can't even source it. Like maybe I'm just overwhelmed. Like whatever it is, I go. I try to just like go on there, apologize, and if I can free up my afternoon and take a nap and watch a Netflix movie or go for a walk or whatever, then that's what I do. And cut myself some slack, because I am a hard charger. Most of us are, that are going to be associated with you and me. And we are harder on ourselves than anyone else possibly could be.
Yep.
And so learning to have some self-compassion is, I think it's the hardest thing to learn how to do, but just cut yourself some slack and get up the next day and put the armor back on and go back to work, and don't get caught up in like the minutia of the things that happen to you.
Yeah. Gosh, beautiful, brother. So many big takeaways. And I feel like you've taught us today. Well, obviously your example is the biggest thing. So thank you for that. A lot of honor.
Yep.
I know
you're
not looking for that, but I want to thank you and give you the honor you deserve for going out for me and saying, look, these kind of things can be done. And then teaching us what you're doing, these little strategies you have to think, no, this is why I do it, and this is how to keep going. Yeah. We can take that stuff right now, and the people listening, and I can take that, and we can make significant improvements to our lives across every aspect of our lives with these strategies.
And they are interrelated. People too often treat all the way back to the beginning of our conversation. If you just got yourself a cold plunge because it's the new cool thing to do, I've got one, so I believe in them. But like, understanding that the commitment to doing, it's not about what is this actually doing for me. It's about making the commitment to do it every day. That's doing more for you than the physiological changes that might be happening because of the cold plunge itself. It's about saying, for at least this period of time, I'm committing 10 minutes a day. I'm doing this part, it's going to happen every single day. And then let's see what happens from there. And, I think that's the power in just making those tiny incremental little commitments that you stick to no matter what.
Yes. And you can get more out of the commitment and the consistency maybe than the actual thing.
Yeah. Does this work? Does taking this vitamin work? Does meditating or breath work or whatever, does it work? I don't know, man. I know I feel better when I do them, but I also recognize that part of the reason I feel better is because I said I was going to do it and I did it,
I love it. Brother, thank you. Thank you for being on.
Pleasure.
Thank you for sharing your message. Thanks for going out about the world to try to make the world a better place. We appreciate and honor that, man.
Same to you. And I look forward to my invitation to come to Europe to visit you sometime soon. So
well, and I want to come on some sweet adventures.
I know you do.
Any little legs of whatever you're doing, I can get in on. I want in, brother.
We're gonna make it happen.
Okay.